I'm Lisa Johnson, a 34-year-old housewife. I've been married to Jack for 2 years. Jack is highly educated and works for a prestigious company. Growing up in a single-parent family, my father fell ill shortly after I got married. After battling the illness for a year and a half, he passed away, leaving behind an inheritance of $600,000. However, Jack used this $600,000 to remodel his parents' house on his own. Choose between living with my mom or getting a divorce, Jack said, seemingly looking down on me with this ultimatum. My mind was already made up. Without a second thought, I quickly signed the divorce papers and said, "Goodbye, you'll regret this." Jack retorted, "We won't regret anything, you're useless," and moved to his parents' house, which had just been renovated. But at the worst possible time, it came to light that his father had borrowed money using the house as collateral. Now unable to pay it back, the newly renovated house was seized. The renovations had ironically increased its value, so it sold for a pretty penny. But the debt was far from paid off, and Jack and his mother were also burdened with it. Losing their house and learning of his father's debt, Jack and his family came to my place, unreasonably venting their frustrations on me. "It's all your fault, Lisa. Ever since you married into the Johnson family, only bad things have happened. You're the curse of our family," they accused. Jack even had the audacity to say, "You're my wife, so you're gonna help pay off this debt." I couldn't hold back any longer. "How dare you use my father's inheritance and then demand I help pay off your debt? You only consider me your wife or family when it's convenient. Couldn't you have valued our time as a couple more? Value our time together? Don't make me laugh. Even after we got married, you were barely home because of your dad's illness and neglected your household duties. My parents divorced when I was 12. And unusually, I was raised by my father. He quit his long-time job and switched to a company with no overtime and a 5 p.m. end time to raise me. His salary dropped, and I took away his sense of fulfillment. He made lunch for me every day and never skimped on dinner. Despite the negative connotations of divorce, I enjoyed living with my father. That's why I didn't leave home even after turning 30. How could anyone abandon their sick father? There was nothing else I could do for him. So I wanted to take care of him until the end, after all the love and time he had devoted to me. You cared more about your dad than me, didn't you? It's not about who I cared more for. Sure, I may not have done enough housework. But you said it was okay because you ate dinner at your parents' place. You left me no other choice. You were at the hospital all day. I've always thought marrying you was a mistake. Honestly, I did you a favor by marrying someone like you who was past her prime. You should be grateful for that." Jack wasn't the only one who thought this marriage was a mistake. I too believed this marriage was nothing but a failure. I was 32 when I married Jack. That age isn't considered past one's prime nowadays. Jack and I met at a mixer. At a mixer set up by a junior colleague from the company where I worked, there was Jack, working for a top-tier company. It might be hard to believe, but I rarely participated in mixers. I wasn't that desperate for a boyfriend, nor was I in a hurry to get married. However, my father seemed worried. He even considered asking relatives to arrange a blind date for me, which I firmly refused. Jack, who seemed like an extra to me, approached me actively. Looking back, he probably mistook my quietness for submissiveness and thought he could look down on me with his educational and career achievements. Indeed, Jack was an elite, a graduate of a prestigious private university, working in a top-tier company. Someone like me, raised by a single parent and only a high school graduate, was seen as not being in his league. Somehow, we ended up dating, and it naturally led to marriage. I had my reservations about getting married, but I was convinced that marrying Jack would resolve them. Initially, we weren't exactly lovey-dovey, but we got along fine. Surprisingly, Jack often came home early, allowing me to prepare dinner. I thought his company was quite good since they didn't require overtime and seemed to be a top-tier company. However, Jack never talked about his work. We hardly had any common topics of conversation. I think we were just somehow getting by as a married couple. I learned a few months after getting married that Jack was already sidelined at his job. He might be good at studying, but his communication skills were poor, and he couldn't get along with others. He made frequent mistakes at work and was considered incompetent. Yet, out of kindness, they didn't fire him but demoted him, waiting for him to resign. So, Jack's salary wasn't as high as he claimed. For Jack, his education and career were everything. He had nothing else to boast about. I doubt there's a husband who could understand you as much as I do. We had to give up on having kids, and Mom surely wanted to see her grandchildren too. At 20, I was diagnosed with a uterine condition that made it difficult for me to have children. At that point, I had given up on the idea of marriage in the future. While happiness means different things to different people, many couples desire children. I decided to marry Jack because he said he didn't want kids. The biggest handicap for me was the possibility of not being able to have children. Jack seemed to eliminate that concern. So, I married him, and now this? What was the point of getting married? Your cooking is terrible. I've told you many times to learn from my mother, but you never tried. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who has to eat bad food. You have a tendency towards diabetes, so you need a restricted diet. That's why the food is bland and the menu limited. You seem to love your mother's fried dishes, but imitating that would be dangerous, right? It's the wife's job to figure out how to make it work. Eating is my greatest pleasure. Jack had started gaining weight rapidly after we got married. He was a bit chubby before, but he got significantly heavier. I thought it was only a matter of time before he developed diabetes, so I tried to serve balanced meals. But he complained about the taste being too bland, wanting more food, and not liking it. Well, then you can just have your mom cook for you for the rest of your life. I can file for divorce right away, and you can go back to living with your beloved mother as you wish. Divorce? Don't joke around. How can I say we're divorcing after just 2 years of marriage? It looks bad. But I warned you, didn't I? That you'll regret this. Besides, it's not my fault that the house was seized because of the misuse of my father's inheritance. If anything, I'm the one who's been wronged here. And I'm not even asking you to return the $600,000. It's our marital property. What's wrong with me using it? I thought renovating the house was the ultimate way to honor my parents. What kind of filial piety is that? I had intended to use my father's money to buy my own house. Jack and I lived in a rented apartment near his parents' home. Paying rent seemed pointless when we could be paying off a mortgage. Sure, $600,000 wasn't enough to buy a house outright, but it was a significant down payment. And he used it on his parents' house renovations. Don't run away from this. Run away? What do you mean? You just mentioned divorce. That's when I realized. Jack, you said divorcing after 2 years looks bad. That says everything about you. You're only concerned about how others see you, not caring or valuing the people closest to you. Nowadays, divorce isn't a shackle. I'll lose my standing at work. You are a working adult, you should understand. But then again, you're just a high school grad who luckily got a job, so maybe you don't understand things like office politics. Oh, should I expect Jack to climb the corporate ladder? What's with that sly smile? That's your habit, that mocking smile. Have you been going to work lately? You leave the house saying you're going to work, but then you just kill time in parks or libraries, right? Jack visibly panicked. He was sidelined at his job, and the lack of work was taking a toll on his mental health. He was increasingly reluctant to go to the office. I heard from a neighbor, even before Jack moved back to his parents' house, about his whereabouts. What are you talking about? Who said that? Do you have any proof? It's so obvious how you react, Jack. You're clearly disturbed. But whether you quit your job or whatever, it doesn't concern me anymore. I can choose from plenty of jobs. If I leave my current company, others will hire me. I didn't graduate from a prestigious private university for nothing. He was bluffing, but his voice trembled and the volume dropped. I doubt there's a better company than his current one for him. He could find work if he compromised, but he'd likely struggle with communication wherever he went. Well, good luck with the debt repayment. It's also your and your mother's fault for not seeing through your father's true nature. My father-in-law was always smiling and pleasant. Jack said he'd never been scolded by his father. His mother, on the other hand, was dominant. His mother treated his father almost like a slave, always belittling and making a joke out of him. Yet, this dynamic of the father being under the mother's thumb had become the norm, and nobody really questioned it. No matter what was said to him, his father would just laugh it off with a grin. Behind his smile, my father-in-law hid a severe gambling addiction. Neither Jack nor his mother seemed to notice. When I learned about it, I couldn't believe the gentle father-in-law I knew had such a dark side. The debt ballooned, but he couldn't stop gambling, even resorting to using the house as collateral. I had suspected something when I saw a pile of collection letters addressed to him at Jack's family home. Actually, I had a hunch about it. The reason is that when I visited Jack's parents' house, I saw a pile of collection letters addressed to his father. Despite such a sloppy situation, I wonder if his mother really didn't notice. Well, she always treated her husband as if he didn't exist, so it's not surprising she didn't notice. Father must have been stressed. He had nothing to do after retirement and turned to gambling. But I can't blame him. It was his only hobby. Jack, what is it with the Johnson family's sense of money? Wasting $600,000, accepting gambling as just a hobby? I can't understand it. Your father probably thought he could pay off all the debt if he just won, but he kept losing, and it twisted his thinking. It's like seeing the dark side of a Buddha-like man. Jack had no comeback. The magnitude of his father's actions would continue to haunt him. Then, eerily, his usually silent mother spoke up, seizing the moment to retort. Ever since I started listening, it's all been about how Jack is bad, or how his dad is bad. But it all started with you, Lisa. I didn't speak up because I wanted to hear Jack's side too, but I was getting so irritated. My husband was just deceived, that's all. He was just ignorant. And you're calling that his dark side? Is that even fair to say? Being ignorant can be a crime too. That's why our home was seized. If you couldn't realize it until it got to this point, then your marriage is definitely a failure. In a marriage of 40 years, not interfering with each other is the right approach. Jack is married now too, and having a relationship like air is comfortable. That's something you, with only 2 years of marriage, couldn't possibly understand. His mother was still assertive. She had the talent to create an atmosphere where she was never wrong. But, didn't you always badmouth your husband? Calling him useless, boring to be around. Even talking about a late-life divorce. Saying things like, if I divorced, I could live just with Jack. When I did meet you, all you ever did was complain about him. I didn't meet his mother often, but whenever I did, she would just rant about his father, even in his presence, which made it understandable why he harbored darkness. She would often talk about when his father was in car sales. Unable to sell a single car by himself, his wife had to beg relatives to buy cars from his dealership. Certainly, his father wasn't cut out for sales. He was more of a civil servant type. Always smiling and being a calming presence to everyone. Isn't that right? I addressed his father, who was still looking timid. Knowing his true nature made me even more upset. You also borrowed $60,000 from my father, didn't you? Jack and his mother turned their attention to him. He just smiled and said, yes, that's true. Please have Jack handle the repayment. As you can see, I don't have any money left. Jack, is that okay with you? What? Why should I? Is there a loan agreement or something? Maybe Dad should just declare bankruptcy. My father was happy whenever your dad visited him in the hospital. I was glad, thinking he was a kind person. Neither you nor your mother ever visited. And now I find out he was just mooching money off him. Taking advantage of a sick man under the guise of a hospital visit. What an evil act. I'm planning to go through a lawyer for this. Jack, you always say I'm stupid, uneducated. Well, because I'm stupid, I'll ask a professional to handle it. But my trump card isn't just this. I have a bigger bombshell. I had been holding back on saying this. Even to my dear father. Also, there's one more thing I've asked the lawyer to handle. I was sexually harassed by your father, Jack. Jack and his mother burst into laughter. You're trying to corner Dad further by telling such a vile lie. There's no way Dad would do something like that. What a thing to say. Really? I think my husband is the furthest thing from a sexual harasser. Lisa, you must be really desperate to resort to such lies. It was frustrating. I even doubted myself. But my father-in-law would subtly touch me whenever I visited their house. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but the frequency of these touches was too high. The way he skillfully managed to do it without Jack or his mother noticing made me suspect he was doing this to others as well. He was extremely cunning. Exploiting the fact that Jack and his mother would never believe such a thing about him. But it made me feel so uncomfortable. The thought of it escalating further made me avoid going to their house altogether. I used my father's care as a reason to distance myself from their house. Do you have anything to say? You remember what you did, don't you? It wasn't just the touches. He had been secretly taking pictures with his phone. For example, when I was going upstairs, he would be at the bottom with his phone out. And once, when he and his wife visited our apartment, I caught him rummaging through my underwear. It wasn't okay just because nothing more happened. So, why don't you show us your phone? There's evidence in there, isn't there? Talk about being self-absorbed. As if my dad would do something like that. We should sue you for defamation. You're taking advantage of his kindness and silence. The truth is why he can't refute it. But it's fine, I have solid evidence. Evidence? What kind of evidence? It must be just a threat. Honestly, I can't have any positive feelings for you. You're trying to drag us through hell with lies, and I question the upbringing you received. That's why I was against your marriage to Jack. I could see this coming. Jack is just unlucky. Jack's mother was opposed to our marriage. Jack was her pride, and she devoted everything to him. She probably dreamed of him being an educated elite in a good company. And he obediently followed her path. She taught Jack only academics, neglecting to teach him how to interact with people. He preferred reading and studying at home over playing with friends. That's probably why. He struggles with communication. Even at the mixer, he wouldn't look people in the eye. And after we got married and moved to this apartment, he wouldn't return neighbors' greetings. He fundamentally struggled with people. His mother probably didn't want him to marry. But Jack was already over 30, and probably under pressure from others. She must have had high standards for his wife. So when Jack brought home a woman over 30 with only a high school diploma, she disapproved. But Jack's affection for me was strong at the time, so he insisted. I knew what to expect from a mother-in-law, so I was prepared. That's why she found various faults. There has never been a divorce in the Johnson family. Your parents are divorced, right? And unusually, you were raised by your father. Doesn't that mean there was something wrong with your mother? Maybe something related to men? When I first met her, my mother-in-law asked me these things. It's not like Jack's family was particularly wealthy or of great lineage. Yet, being from a single-parent family seemed to be a hindrance to marriage. It seemed she wanted to live together, but their house was old and inconvenient. The plumbing was inefficient, it was hot in the summer, and cold in the winter due to drafts. The house had an awkward layout, including 2 impractical small rooms, each about 75 square feet, making it an uncomfortable place to live. I understand wanting to remodel, but not with my father's inheritance. Though she finally accepted our marriage, Jack's dependency on his mother became apparent right away. Whenever he was displeased with me, he would complain to his mother before talking to me. Naturally, she took Jack's side, shielding him from blame, which only encouraged his behavior. She would come to our apartment and make snide remarks at me. A typical mean mother-in-law. She often mentioned her niece, Jack's cousin, who was supposedly an actress. I'd never heard of her or seen her on TV. It turned out she was just an extra. She would say things like, "My niece is beautiful, kind, and domestic. I wish Jack had married someone like her." Am I the only one who thinks that if someone is truly domestic, they wouldn't become an entertainer? It seems like any daughter-in-law would be subject to her criticism. No one could ever meet her standards. Are you done with what you wanted to say? Ultimately, Jack and his mother just came to complain about me. I still lived in the apartment we shared, and they probably thought they could stay and eat here. But I had no such intentions. Are you sure about this? You won't regret it? I wanted to make sure. But I won't regret it. It's Jack who became useless, not me. Regret? What kind of regret? Did you anticipate this would happen? Yes, it was within my expectations. You're mean. I've always thought so. Lisa, you're cold, intentionally malicious. You always act in your own interest, never thinking about others. That's exactly what I should be saying to you. You misuse the money my father left, and then burden me with even more debt. That's completely absurd. Why should I suffer the consequences of your actions? It was nothing short of an accident involving me. Isn't $600,000 a small inheritance? When my father passed away, he left about $1.3 million. Then you should have used that money for the renovations. You have 5 siblings, right? If you divide $1.3 million among 5 people, that's $320,000 each. What? I was talking about the amount he left, not the share. I renounced my inheritance for my brother's sake. Lisa, are you only interested in money? Huh? Given the situation, I have no choice but to talk about money. Yes, compared to $1.3 million, $600,000 might seem small. But it was important money my father left for me. So what were you planning to do with that $600,000? I wanted to use it for our own home. That's why I made it happen. Jack's smug face really irked me. I told you I wanted to live with my parents eventually, right? That's why I renovated their house to make it our home. Our home? It wasn't even suitable for 2 families. This is just an after-the-fact justification. He exploited my dream of a home to justify the renovation. Either way, the $600,000 isn't coming back. And then there's my father-in-law, who so casually incurred a $600,000 debt. He should be placed in a facility specializing in gambling addiction. Once I divorce Jack, it's not my problem anymore. But Jack and his mother will have to deal with the debt. As my mother-in-law said, my father-in-law isn't the type to work vigorously. At 65, it's unrealistic for him to start working. This means the burden will likely fall on Jack. In addition to that, I'm going to make Jack repay the $60,000 he borrowed from my father through a lawyer. But Jack doesn't seem to be working right now. I wonder if he can muster the determination to work and pay off the debt. I'm so glad I signed the divorce papers. Though it's just a piece of paper, its presence makes a huge difference. Since you said just $600,000, you should be able to pay off the debt quickly, right? Can you also pay back the $60,000 your father borrowed from mine soon? I want to use it for my next move. I don't want to stay in this apartment. Of course, that's nothing. I earn more than guys my age. Good, I hope you find your next job quickly. With your education and 13 years in a top company, you'll be fine anywhere. I couldn't help but want to throw back a sarcastic remark. He never helps with housework, and he's a burden at work. His mother is the only one who accepts and is kind to him. That's why he wanted to renovate for her. To get her approval. Men are often said to be mama's boys, seeking a mother in their partner instead of a wife. At the slightest issue, it's always mom, mom. I'm done with such a mama's boy. Jack, you can go back to your ideal life. Stay by your mom's side forever, getting pampered. That's your happiness. Jack's face turned red, insulted. Prideful men like him hate being mocked the most. And as for you, who has been silent this whole time, acting as if you're not even here, I think you have the highest pride of all. You haven't apologized even once. How could you borrow money from my father, who was already weak and drained? And about your harassment towards me, even if no one believes me, I will sue. Your smile is creepy, your eyes don't laugh. You camouflage with that smile, but your true nature is just money and women. Scary. I will never have anything to do with the Johnson family again. Now that you understand, please leave. Any further communication will be through my lawyer. I kicked out Jack, his mother, and father. It was going to be the coldest night of the year, according to the news. Through the lawyer, I arranged for Jack to repay the $60,000. The divorce was finalized. And with the recorded video I had prepared earlier as evidence, I smoothly filed for compensation for the harassment from my father-in-law. Finally, I felt liberated from the Johnson family. It was only a 2-year marriage, but it felt longer due to caring for my father. As for my mother, after divorcing my father, she took over the family's clothing store. I told you, didn't I? That you would regret this. There is no fault on my part for the misuse of my father's inheritance and the seizure. If anything, I'm the one who's been inconvenienced. And I'm not even asking you to return the $600,000. Now, she lives in a luxury condo. I live with my mother in the same condo. Living with my father was enjoyable, but moving forward, working with my mother at the clothing store will also be a fulfilling experience in my life. Jack, in the end, was laid off from his company. Now, he lives quietly in a rundown 1-room apartment with his mother and father. Birds of a feather, they will probably live, licking each other's wounds. What my father left behind wasn't just money. He left behind memories far more valuable than money. No matter how many times I say thank you, it wouldn't be enough. But still, I'll say it. Thank you, Dad.